Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me for the 9th episode in the Conversation with Alan series. I created this series to have open and honest discussions about the rise of hate and the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States, with high hopes that it leads to conversations that make us all think about our own place in history and what we can do together to change our country's course. My guest tonight, Scott Richman, is the Anti-Defamation League's Regional Director of the New York and New Jersey office. Scott is here to discuss the rise of hate and anti-Semitism in this country and around the world. In addition, Scott will discuss the work he and the organization does that includes incident response, anti-bias education, legislative initiatives, educational programs, fundraising, and leadership development, all of which is designed to fight anti-Semitism and combat hate in all its forms. In addition to his work with ADL, Scott hosts a weekly national podcast called From the Front Lines, where he reflects on the work he's doing with the ADL. He is an experienced advocate dedicated to developing community partnerships and initiatives that provide justice, equality, and fair treatment for all. I'm really excited that Scott's here tonight and have the opportunity to learn more about the incredible work the ADL is doing to help stop hate. Please welcome to the Locher Room, Scott Richman. Hey, Scott.
Hi, Alan. Thanks so much for inviting me as your guest.
Well, I really appreciate it. I think I had mentioned to you when we spoke, I really, when I started this, was hoping to get someone from the ADL because you guys truly are on the front lines every day fighting anti-Semitism and hate. And this is, what I'm trying to do, even if it's in a small way with this show. So thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I mean, ADL is an organization that's sole mission is fighting hate. And it's been that way since we were founded in 1913. Pretty unique.
1913.
Yes.
I didn't realize that. Wow, that I apologize that I did not realize that. Well, yeah. I know.
Well, we'll get it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible and kind of sad in the same way that it's 2021.
Right. Right. I mean, our mission has changed over the years, but it's always focused on the same thing, fighting hate, not just anti-Semitism. I think a lot of people think that ADL is about fighting anti-Semitism, which of course we are, and we're a Jewish organization, but it's about fighting hate in all its forms.
Yeah. And, being Jewish myself, I knew of the organization. And, I think my knowledge of it was thinking that it was purely anti-Semitism. And I love that it is hate in all its forms. I think that's truly important. But I think what's really important for, people watching, for myself to truly understand where the origins of anti-Semitism, started, if you can talk about some of that.
So, this is about people who were different, and differences don't sit so well with other people. When there are differences, people are somehow threatened by them. So the Jewish people were always a bit different. In ancient times, you're talking about a group of people who had a radical idea about monotheism. This is a time when people worshiped many gods. And the idea that you were coming around and saying you should only worship one God was a radical departure from that. And people were very threatened by it. And even in ancient times, there was, they didn't call it anti-Semitism back then, but there was hatred towards this group of people. And then you have the rise of Christianity and the audacity of the Jewish people not to accept Christianity and not to accept Jesus Christ as the Messiah. So that gave rise, of course, to being also very different, but also this idea that was part of many. At its heart, anti-Semitism is a series of conspiracy theories. And one of those conspiracy theories is that Jews killed Jesus Christ. They're responsible for the killing of Jesus Christ. So, that even in ancient times and going, of course, through the Middle Ages and the Crusades and the Inquisition and all of these were related to this idea that Jews didn't accept Christianity, and either forcing them to accept Christianity or penalty. There's penalty of death. And then, moving forward, these conspiracy theories continue. And anti-Semitism is a kind of virus that morphs. It always morphed with the times. And those conspiracy theories morphed into different kinds of manifestations. This idea that Jews were somehow in control of things, in control of government, in control of media, in control of business, and somehow they are pulling the strings. Also, this idea that Jews are somehow associated with money, greedy, and even that, it goes back to kind of this idea of ancient times with the temple and the money changers in the temple. All of these stories from the Bible. Those conspiracy theories moved forward to the Holocaust. This was the firmament that led to a situation where Jews were considered somehow subhuman, and the ability to then impose the Holocaust by Hitler. And then you have another form of anti-Semitism, which is Holocaust denial. All of these are a series of conspiracy theories. We call them tropes. And it's very interesting because this is a form of discrimination. It's a form of bias. And there are many biases. Systemic racism is a form of bias, but it manifests against African Americans. But it manifests itself in such a different way. So systemic racism is about somehow a system that keeps people from achieving their potential. That's not what anti-Semitism is. Anti-Semitism are all of these conspiracy theories that somehow set Jews apart in some way. And often they're conflicting. Jews were accused of being communists, but they were also accused of being ultra-capitalists. This is the sort of irony of anti-Semitism, and it's sort of whatever suits the time, in whatever way the time needed some sort of enemy, they would find a way that the Jews became that enemy. And this is sort of a very brief look at it, and it just manifested itself in so many ways. I mean, if I could say, when my parents were growing up, they lived in a certain time, a time when in this country there were quotas for Jews in country clubs. In colleges, there were restrictions, for Jews in country clubs. They weren't allowed into many country clubs. There were quotas in universities, and there were, Jews couldn't get into law firms or the top corporate jobs or whatever it is. That really was not the experience of my generation. I think our generation, really, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s.
Yep.
And, in the 70s and 80s, there was certainly anti-Semitism, but nothing like that. It manifested itself in a very different way. And for the most part, I didn't think quite as much about anti-Semitism as they did. It wasn't imposed on me. Here and there were some instances.
Correct. I don't remember really back in the 70s and 80s hearing, conspiracy theories like we do today, but to think that it even went back for, before we were kids, is just incredible to think how long this has been perpetuating.
Yeah. And, it's really come roaring back to some extent. I mean, I can give you the data if you want to go into that. But
yeah, I would love to get to that. But I going back, you said 1913. What was the ADL's mission? Do you know what the mission was back then?
Well, the mission has always been the same. It's to prevent the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all. That has always been the mission. It's this idea of fighting hate in all its forms. It's just that the way we've done it, what we've encountered, has changed. ADL was founded at a time when there really was terrible anti-Semitism against Jews and hatred against all different groups of people, many of them minorities, immigrants to this country. Today you're encountering anti-Semitism or hate against immigrants, again, against marginalized people, but it manifests itself in a different way, and it's dealt with in a very, very different way. A lot of it is on social media. A lot of it is online today. So, we need very, very different tools.
Yeah, I mean, the online component just adds a whole other, force of nature, really. How does the ADL define hate?
This is any kind of bias or persecution of a person based upon their faith, their background, their gender, who they love, whatever it is, that would be considered hate.
Wow. You were going to talk about those numbers. I would love to hear some of those,
Sure. I mean, ADL does an audit of anti-Semitism.
Right.
That audit of anti-Semitism is something we've been doing since 1979. So we keep track. We're seen as this sort of quantitative people. And a lot of times when you see in the newspapers sort of ADL being quoted, you're going to see some sort of statistic there because ADL is keeping track of this. The thing is, our audit of anti-Semitic incidents is not a survey. I think a lot of people think it's a survey. People reaching out saying, have you experienced anti-Semitism? What does that look like? Are you afraid of anti-Semitism? You're keeping track of those percentages. Or surveys of non-Jews and what are you thinking of Jews? We do that, but that's not what the audit is. The audit is a reflection of our everyday work. ADL responds to anti-Semitic incidents. We have a reporting form, adl.org/report. If anybody experiences an anti-Semitic incident, whether it's online, in the workplace, on campus, whatever it is, and not just a crime, we're not just talking about hate crimes, but hate incidents, anything, they can report it to ADL, and we will work with the victim. We will work with elected officials, we'll work with faith leaders, we'll work with law enforcement, whatever it is, to somehow get some sort of resolution or pass it along to the appropriate authorities. So I'm the director of one of ADL's regional offices. We have 25 offices across the country. I'm the director for the largest office, which is New York and New Jersey. Now, the New York and New Jersey office gets about 30 incidents a week, anti-Semitic incidents reported to us that we somehow need to deal with. It's a lot on average over the course of a year. And what we do is once a year, we take all of these incidents that have been reported to us, as well as the other 24 offices. It's compiled, it's looked at, it's analyzed, it's broken down in terms of the categories of whether it's harassment, vandalism, or assault. Those are the three ways we categorize anti-Semitic incidents. And then we put that out there. So our audit in 2013 showed that there were approximately 1,000 anti-Semitic incidents across the country. Our audit in 2020 showed that there were over 2,000. So that's a quick snapshot to say how much this has grown in the past 7 years, really quite a bit. Now, just to add a little bit more to that, 2020, which is our latest figures, we expected anti-Semitism to be down. We expected it to be down because it was a year of COVID. It was a year of lockdowns, quarantine, social distancing. So you don't have the same kind of schools were closed and you have many of these issues in schools. We expected it to be lower. Now, 2019 was the highest year on record. It was nearly 2,100 incidents. So that in 40 years of keeping track, it was down. It was down in 2020 from that high of 2019, but only by 4%. So it was still at historic highs, and it was higher than 2018, higher than 2017, higher than 2016. So we seem to have achieved some sort of plateau. I don't want to call it a new normal, but
I hope not. We hope not.
It's not budging. It's not budging. And this year, perhaps we would have seen a little bit less, but the wave of anti-Semitism following the Israel-Hamas conflict in May, that resulted in so many anti-Semitic incidents. We were up in the month of May, year over year, 75% from the year before. So, in many of those incidents, I think your listeners probably saw them in the papers. Very brazen kinds of incidents.
Yeah, they were
up and harassing people going into synagogue. These incidents in Times Square.
Yeah.
So those are the basic statistics, and I'll give you one more stat, which is that we of those offices looked at incidents in 47 states. That's where we saw anti-Semitic incidents.
Mhm.
That's what was reported to us. Of those 47 states, New York is number one, and New Jersey is number two by a lot. California, Pennsylvania, these states that have significant Jewish communities have significant levels of anti-Semitism, but New York is always the highest. And of course, I'm the director for New York and New Jersey, which is not so easy.
Right. And you mentioned, I mean, the conflict in it went up because of the conflict, but is that a lot of misinformation as well, that people are reacting to things on the news that they, for most of those people, probably know nothing about?
Yeah. So look, I can't necessarily comment on what people know or don't know, but what I do know is that people in this country, Jews, visible Jews in this country, were being blamed for that conflict.
Right.
So, just because somebody wears a yarmulke doesn't mean that they agree with every one of the policies of the state of Israel. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but the perpetrator has no idea and doesn't take the time to ask. And that's anti-Semitism, pure and simple, to be lashing out at somebody in this country simply because they are Jewish and not for any other reason. I will say, just in a personal story, my own son, who wears a yarmulke, was on the Upper West Side this summer, and a group of people came up to him and began screaming "Free Palestine" at him. That's very, very uncomfortable, and you never know where that's going to go.
For sure. I mean, just to be on the street of New York walking and have something like that happen, it has got to be a scary situation.
Yeah.
You had mentioned to me that the ADL has had a strong relationship that I think goes back to the 1950s with the police. Can you talk about the importance of that relationship?
Sure. I mean, in terms of keeping Jewish communities safe from people who wish them harm, having a strong relationship with law enforcement becomes very, very important. And ADL established that relationship. We maintain that relationship to this day. A very important piece of our work. We do a lot of workshops with law enforcement, workshops on hate crimes, on extremism, on what is anti-Semitism. And we work closely with law enforcement when we are dealing with incidents. So maintaining that relationship with the NYPD Hate Crimes Division, for example, very important. With the FBI, there are many issues that cross state boundaries. In New Jersey, we have a close relationship with the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. All of these matter. There were many incidents in 2019, assaults, the Jersey City incident, for example, or the attack in Muncie during Hanukkah. People lost their lives here, and having that close relationship is critical. And another piece of law enforcement, I would say, is with attorneys general. I actually was in Washington, D.C. this past week at the National Association of Attorneys General Summit. And the reason that I was there was because the summit was devoted to fighting hate and the ways that attorneys general across the country can fight hate. ADL becomes a very good partner because we have all of these offices and they can all work with an ADL office. And the panel was devoted to this idea that attorneys general can partner with communal organizations. So I accompanied the New Jersey Attorney General to that panel. We were on there with Wyoming, and it was moderated by the Virgin Islands Attorney General about all the ways that a communal partner can work with the Office of the Attorney General. And we spoke about the fact that our close relationship through the years meant that when the Jersey City attack happened in December of 2019, we immediately activated that, and we were really working hand in hand throughout trying to respond. And we, as ADL, we were reflecting the needs of the community, a community that wanted to see hate crimes prosecution in this instance, and an attorney general that was trying to very quickly weigh the evidence and look at the situation, but needed to hear from ADL's perspective, from the community perspective, that this needed to move along very, very quickly. So that kind of relationship becomes extremely important, and ADL prides itself on all of those important relationships.
That's great. I think I told you, and my viewers know, that the events in Charlottesville really ignited a fire in me wanting to use my voice where my parents, who were Holocaust survivors, no longer could. And, thinking about what their reaction would have been to witnessing that in 2017 when that happened. Can you talk about white supremacy and the danger it poses, not just here, but all around the world?
Yeah, sure. I mean, white supremacy is not just an attack on Jews. It's really an attack on many different communities. They have no love for all these different communities: African Americans, Latinos, LGBTQ, whatever it is.
And it seems, after January 6th, institutions.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, one thing I would say about Charlottesville, and this is to sort of echo what they were saying, this concept of Jews will not replace us. I think a lot of people are confused by that chant and what it really means. And what it really means is this great replacement theory, which is out there. It's this idea that Jews are the puppeteers, that they control things. It's back to the tropes that I was mentioning before. Jews are, the white supremacists may be concerned about this idea that they are being replaced by Black and brown people, as they would say it. But there's another piece to it, and that's this idea that Jews are the puppet masters. Jews are the ones who are bringing Black and brown people to this country in order to replace the white people. That's the belief. And you see it again and again, also in Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, with the Tree of Life Synagogue, the shooter came in. Why? Because that synagogue had done a program with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society the week before, which sort of touted this idea of immigration reform and support for immigrants. So I don't want to say his name, but the shooter came in, and he did it because he believed that this synagogue was bringing in immigrants to replace the white people. It's the same idea again and again. So this is a core belief of many white supremacists, or more white nationalist groups. And, it's really particularly heinous. And they very much were emboldened over the past few years. And I want to give you, again, ADL, all about statistics, to give you a concrete example. In 2017, we began keeping track of something that we hadn't been keeping track of before. And it's a statistic about white supremacist propaganda.
Was it a response to Charlottesville that they started keeping track of that?
It wasn't specifically, I don't think, in response to Charlottesville. I think it was in response to something that we were seeing that was beginning to rise. So white supremacist propaganda is stickering and flyering. White supremacist groups that put stickers or flyers on light poles or, at train stations or on campuses, whatever it is. Now, in 2017 in New York, where I live, there were approximately 20 incidents of white supremacist propaganda that we counted. Terrible, but in 2020, there were over 300 incidents. That is an exponential rise, and we saw that across the country with thousands and thousands of incidents in 2020. I think the total was 5,000 incidents in 2020. Why? Because this is a group of people who feel emboldened. This is a group of people who feel that they are achieving what they want to achieve by putting up these flyers and stickers. It gives them visibility. It helps them to recruit more people to their cause. There's always a website on there. We're talking about groups in this region, like the Patriot Front, like the New Jersey European Heritage Association, the American Identity Movement, and they became quite active in the past few years.
Wow. It's crazy. One of our viewers, Eddie, says, hello from Dallas, Texas. I'm a retired military. I am both Native American and German, and I have seen a rise in hate. And his question is, how do we change this thinking? And I mean, that's the thing. Like, I think about, I've seen interviews on talk shows with former white supremacists talking about how they get mixed up in these beliefs. And I feel like, the media needs to be, showing those people who have left that and spoken up about why they, we need more to combat this and these theories that are not true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if we think about the ways to combat hate, there's generally three ways that are spoken about. One way is legislative, second is education, and third is civil society. So, legislative, you're talking about hate crimes laws, you're
Right.
talking about laws related to reporting of incidents. All of these things are constantly spoken about, and they're very, very important. But, what I often say is that these are the guardrails. They keep people in their lane a little bit, but they don't change hearts and minds. Education, the second way, that does change hearts and minds. Very, very important. ADL as a big piece, we're not just about the problem, we're also about the solution.
Right.
And a big piece of our work is our anti-bias and anti-bullying work across the country. It's not specifically focused on anti-Semitism, it's all forms of hate.
Right.
So last year, 1.3 million students went through ADL's anti-bias and anti-bullying programs. This is ADL trying to change the future. This is how we see it being done.
Oh, wow. Is that done through sort of volunteer program of that? Like, are volunteers doing that through the ADL, or is it paid employees?
So
I'm just curious because I would love to help if there's a way to do that on my own, here in New Jersey.
So it's done through the schools.
Gotcha.
All of these programs are done in the schools. Either it's ADL staff or we bring in facilitators. Our two principal programs are No Place for Hate and A World of Difference. Your listeners can Google that, ADL, A World of Difference, ADL, No Place for Hate. And you can find how schools can get involved with this. And you'll find it on our website or on the national site, adl.org. And it's across the country. 1.3 million students across the country. I'll talk for a second about No Place for Hate.
Yeah, please.
It's such an amazing initiative. And we're talking about this on a very auspicious day because today was the kickoff for this year's No Place for Hate.
Wow.
It goes according to the school year. And today was the kickoff day, which I'll explain in a moment. No Place for Hate is a concept. It's a concept where you're bringing together the community to figure out programs that fit that community to fight hate. In this case, you're talking about schools. So step one is putting together a group of students, parents, teachers, and administrators who form the group that figures out what the school needs and the ways they're going to fight hate. And they work with the ADL staff to come up with activities that fight hate. And it could manifest itself in all different ways. It could be that the whole community reads a book and then there are conversations about it. Really, it could be anything, and they could focus on different things. Maybe there was an incident that happened that they're trying to respond to. And they do this over the course of a year. And at the end of the year, if they've met all the requirements, they're accredited by ADL as a, quote, no place for hate school. They get a big banner to put up, and you see them in lobbies all over the country. And it's an amazing initiative. It can be for elementary school, middle school, high school. And in our region, in New York, New Jersey, we have hundreds and hundreds of schools that do this every year. And then ADL also becomes the resource for them. They have the relationship should there be any kind of incident in that community. It was launched today formally, but we're actually still accepting applications for the next few weeks in a ceremony with Amanda Gorman.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah. So to remind your listeners, if they don't know who Amanda Gorman is, this is the young woman from Harvard who read the poem at Biden's inauguration, and she really captured the heart of this nation. She spoke about No Place for Hate. She read a few excerpts from her new book, and then she took questions from students across the country. It was about her thoughts about fighting hate. It was so beautiful. I'm sure you can find it online.
Yeah, I'm going to look for it myself. I love that.
Yeah. So your listeners and you can do a great deal by going to your local schools. Any teacher, administrator that superintendent, let them know about No Place for Hate and suggest that they bring it into the community. It's completely free. It's paid for by ADL donors. And it's completely free across the country for people to fight hate. So education is critical, and it's something that we pride ourselves on. The other piece of education I'll just mention, because I know it's so important to you personally, is that we do Holocaust education. This is very, very impactful. We've done a number of studies that show how impactful Holocaust education is, specifically in terms of fighting hate. So that's another piece of our work. It's called Echoes and Reflections. And
yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask, where does the denial for the Holocaust stem from? Has it always been there from, the end of the war to today, or did it start at a certain period?
So there was a period of time when the Holocaust was really not even spoken about. It wasn't spoken about by survivors. It wasn't spoken about by the Jewish community. It really wasn't spoken about at all. Once it began to be spoken about, you saw this backlash. You have people who are anti-Semitic, who don't want the Jews to be getting this kind of attention or sympathy or whatever it is, and they will weave another conspiracy theory. The Holocaust is a myth, or the Holocaust, nobody can prove that it happened the way that it did, or that there were so many people killed, or whatever it is, the conspiracy theory that they weave. That just became another way to not allow the Jews to or to somehow put down the Jews.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah, it's interesting because, as a child, 70s and 80s, I was Jewish. I knew my parents were Holocaust survivors, but I don't really have clear memories of them speaking about it really until Schindler's List had come out, and we encouraged them to put their stories on tape for the Shoah Foundation. But, growing up, I didn't grow up in a large Jewish community. So, that might have been it. It could have still been, trauma and fear for all I know,
Yeah,
looking
we
for.
see that a lot. It's a very common story. There was this sort of idea that you want to move on, or maybe a little bit of, there's guilt. There's all kinds of things wrapped up in there. And
Yeah, I have a cousin in New Jersey, two male cousins who told me that their mom didn't want them to say they were Jewish when they went to school. I never really said I was Jewish, and that might be related. I let people sort of guess what my religion or nationality was. I never really came right out and said it, and that might be part of, just that's how it was back then.
yeah, yeah.
But what do you see as the biggest threat right now?
Um, the obviously the situation with this rise in anti-Semitism, as writ large, is a big threat. There are different pieces to it. We see obviously the extremist threat as being very, very significant.
Mm-hmm.
In the wake of January 6th, ADL came out with something called the Protect Plan.
Mm-hmm. I was going
Actually,
to ask you about that. I heard that on your podcast.
yeah, so this was presented by Jonathan Greenblatt, our CEO, to the Homeland Security Committee of Congress in early February, in response to what happened on January 6th. It's our plan for helping to curb extremism. ADL has been fighting extremists for a very long time. I mean, we really got our start in the 1930s with exposing the Nazi Party in this country, up to the Ku Klux Klan in the 1950s, and on and on and on. So extremism for us is not something new, but we saw a moment when everybody was focused on extremists following January 6th. We put forth this plan. Protect, each of the letters of Protect, Protect, stand for a different aspect of the plan. Your listeners can Google it and you'll see the different pieces. But that to us is very, very important, very significant. And there are pieces of legislation that are already out there that we're supporting that will curb extremism. Second piece, I would say, is social media. So this is a major issue for our time, a major proliferator of hate. Because, I spoke about these three ways that you can curb hate. I spoke about legislation, about education, about civil society. Civil society, the concept there is that hate is pushed to the margins, that in civil society, when you have something that's unacceptable, it's pushed to the edge of society, and it's not allowed to proliferate. What happens with social media, though, is that people who in the past might have been pushed to the edge of society find other people like them, and they would not have ever found people like them in the past, or it would have been very difficult. Not only do they find people like them, but they find a platform for proliferating those ideas, and a platform for putting out incredible amounts of misinformation and disinformation.
And they can congregate.
And there's power in that as well. They can find a way to organize. So for us, social media becomes a very big threat. Social media has its benefits too. Its ability for people to communicate and get out important ideas also is very beneficial. I mean, it's been that way with every technological innovation, but there needs to be regulation.
Well, I keep going back to, 1913, the ADL was born to fight this. And, conspiracy theories have manifested throughout each decade. But, now the manifestation of that through social media is just so exponentially enormous that it's really scary when you think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the ability of people to get these ideas out there and then for it to have impact and possibly cause harm, all
Which
of that
January
very,
6th, it
very
was
quickly.
clearly how social media really, I think, you know, that was born out of. Uh, you know, um, Left and right, when you look at something like January 6th and even anti-Semitism and hate just in general, is there a big difference between what you see between left and right?
Look, when you're talking about anti-Semitism on the left and the right, you're talking about two different forms of anti-Semitism, I would say. And ADL it's a nonpartisan organization. We're a
Right.
501c3. We are centered on extremism, looks at extremism. So it looks at extremism on the left and the right. But these are different. They're different forms, and you need to look at them differently and deal with them differently. On the right, you're talking about these far right nationalist groups or white nationalist groups, white supremacists that we've spoken a bit about, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously a threat. And when you talk about violence, most of the violence acts that have taken place by these far right extremist groups. The killings that have taken place in the past 10 years or so. On the left, when it comes to anti-Semitism, often it manifests itself as anti-Israelism, as some sort of substitute
Hmm.
for anti-Semitism by treating Israel differently. And here, I think it's very, very important to focus on this idea that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. I get this all the time. Why can't I criticize Israel without being called anti-Semitic? And you absolutely can. I mean, if that were the case, then all Israelis would be considered anti-Semitic because nobody is more critical of the state of Israel than Israelis themselves. You just have to pick up a newspaper in Israel, and you'll see a lot of criticism of Israel.
Well, wouldn't that be the same thing as us here in America? We don't all agree with what happens in, the political landscape, but doesn't mean we're anti-American. We just
But
have difference of opinion.
maybe we're stronger Americans because we're so deeply invested and believe so strongly in the country. But there's nothing wrong with criticizing any country, your own or any other country. But there's a limit. There's a red line. And the red line, when it does rise to the level of anti-Semitism, we often talk about the 3 Ds. This was something that was coined by Natan Sharansky. Natan Sharansky, famous as a refusenik, person who was not able, a Jew who was not able to leave the Soviet Union, eventually came out, moved to Israel, became a member of Knesset, of the parliament, and then eventually became the head of the Jewish Agency. So, very important person in Jewish history, and certainly very important still today. And he came up with this formulation of the 3 Ds. So, the 3 Ds are delegitimization, demonization, and double standards. Delegitimization, that's when you say that Israel doesn't have a right to exist. Think about it in terms of the United States. It's one thing to criticize the United States and what they do in wars overseas or whatever you want to do.
Mhm.
But if in the same breath you also say the United States doesn't have a right to exist, they are a country that the British never they fought with the British, but it was an illegal war, and they don't actually have a right to exist. That rises to the level of anti-Semitism when you say that the country has no right to exist, in this case, Israel. The second is double standards. When you hold Israel to a standard that you would never hold any other country to, that's anti-Semitism. And the third is demonization. So when you somehow say that Israel is some sort of evil empire, when you equate the state of Israel to the Nazis and their tactics, that's anti-Semitism.
Hmm. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, there's so much nuance and just so much to, hate, misinformation, conspiracy theories. You mentioned to me as well that the ADL has taken the lead in the Stop Hate for Profit coalition, I believe, if I got that right, where
Yeah.
putting pressure on social media platforms like Facebook to stop, the Holocaust denial.
So, just before I even describe that, I want to say the fight against hate is a fight for all of us. It's not just a fight against anti-Semitism, not just a fight by Jews, and we recognize that, and we work very closely.
Well,
So,
I mean, we've seen it. I mean, last year with Black Lives Matter and sort of the response to that, the Asian violence because of the coronavirus, we've really seen it spike in affecting all Americans.
we're all in this together, and we need to work together. And the Stop Hate for Profit Coalition reflects that. So, Stop Hate for Profit Coalition was an attempt by several organizations to come together and say enough is enough. So it was ADL, NAACP, LULAC, which is a Latino organization, the National Hispanic Media Center, also a Latino organization, and Color for Change. Several organizations came together and said what's happening on social media, the hate on social media, is not acceptable, and social media needs to change. And what they did, the end of June of 2020, they banded together and they said, we are calling on advertisers on Facebook to pause their advertising for 2 months, for the months of July and August. And we didn't know if anybody would sign on. And by the end of August, we had 1,200 companies sign on to the Stop Hate for Profit Coalition and pause their advertising. And we're not talking about small companies. We're talking about Disney and Coca-Cola and Starbucks and Pfizer, Adidas, really large companies, 1,200 of them. Then we said, we're going to go to Instagram. Instagram is owned by Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
We said, influencers need to pause their posts for 1 day, for 24 hours, in order to fight hate. And we got Sacha Baron Cohen to sign on and lead the way. We ended up with a who's who list, Kim Kardashian and Justin Bieber, very, very prominent influencers that had a reach of 2 billion people.
Wow.
Pause their Instagram for 1 day. That was the power of us banding together. And the results speak for themselves. Through the fall, you saw fall of 2020, you saw a series of changes where Facebook and Twitter, these companies relented, and they began to impose stricter content moderation policies. That's what they would call it, where they wouldn't allow this kind of hate. You said before about Holocaust denial. That for ADL was the straw. It was in 2018 that Mark Zuckerberg said, I abhor Holocaust denial, but I would never stop it from being on Facebook. And that for ADL was a red line. And in October of 2020, he totally reversed that position and said we will no longer allow Holocaust denial on Facebook. That was a major victory for this cause, and very, very important.
I do use Facebook, and that first statement from him was really hard to take. I'm glad they have all started to do the right thing, but it just has to happen. I mean, what was happening before the new administration, and what was the amount of hate, was just a lot. It was a lot for all of us living in this country to deal with, because it was everywhere.
Yeah.
And without them restricting some of that hate speech on their own platforms, really, it was trying for everybody. I mean, people were fighting with their own families.
Yeah. And, I would say that all of you and all of your listeners should feel empowered. I don't think that everybody feels empowered in the way that they really should to do something about hate on these platforms, because they now have these policies in place, but they can't be everywhere and see everything. And we as individuals can report that. If you see hate, if you see misinformation, you can scream at your computer, you can scream at your smartphone, or you can report it. So, each one of them has these content moderation policies, and you can click, for example, on Facebook, there are the three dots. You can click on the three dots and click on report, and you fill out a very brief form, and you explain the situation. This is the way that we can combat this, because nobody wants their account suspended or
Correct. And I'm really so glad you said that, because I actually have never thought of that. And that is, I'm not quiet. I sometimes will, respond to people, but if that's just good to say out loud to remind people we can report it. And speaking of reporting it, I mean, we've talked about how the ADL, tracks all of this, but talk about the true importance of people reporting any incidents that happens to them or that they see.
Absolutely. Just on the point of social media, ADL has something called the Cyber Action Safety Guide. So if you Google ADL and Cyber Action Safety Guide, you're going to come up with a PDF, and that document lists like the top 20 tech companies, and it'll have the name, Facebook, for example, and next to it, two links. One link to their policies, and the next link, how to report. So if you don't know within the system, you can use the Cyber Action Safety Guide, and that will help you.
Love that. That's great.
Yeah. So, reporting is so important. Reporting incidents, you can report them to ADL. Very, very important, whether it happens on campus or in the workplace or, anywhere. You just go to adl.org/report, and you can report that incident. And it's very important. ADL plays, especially with anti-Semitic incidents, we play a bit of an intermediary role. You may not know what to do about it. You may be wondering if this should be brought to the administration on campus. You may be wondering if this should go to law enforcement. ADL will work with you. We have those relationships with law enforcement. We have those relationships on campus, and we will help you figure out what the next step is. So when you fill out, it's a very brief form. No matter where you are in the country, the closest office is going to get in touch with you, and they will work with you. And as I said before, ADL works with the victims and with law enforcement and government officials and faith leaders and all of these. And it doesn't matter if it's just an incident or something that actually rises to the level of a crime. We have all of those relationships in place to be able to assist.
I remember, when we were in the throes of really the rise in the violence against Asians, and hearing Asian kids talk about how their parents were really afraid to report things or to speak up about things happening to them. And that it made me so sad, because we really need to try to stop this.
Yeah, I mean, the wave of hate against Asians is particularly heinous, and obviously sparked by the year of COVID.
Yeah.
But we've seen it. The FBI put out their hate crime statistics just a few weeks ago for 2020. A bit early, by the way. They surprised us. It usually comes out in November. And those hate crime statistics showed a few very interesting things. One thing that it showed was that hate crimes were up, which is obviously very disturbing. Again, this issue of how can that be during lockdown. And two areas where it went up considerably were hate crimes against Asians and hate crimes against African Americans. Huge spike in hate crimes against African Americans. The assumption is that was related to the racial justice movement, which is, of course, very unfortunate.
Yeah. I believe it was. I mean, I heard, of friends who had some incidents, even in New York City, where I wouldn't necessarily have expected it as much. But, yeah. And, I have a friend who has a 15-year-old daughter who's Asian, who was attacked by white men in a Lowe's home store because of, the words being thrown out by our former president, sadly, that, had a young 15-year-old attacked for no reason.
It's horrific. ADL is a nonpartisan organization, but it was very clear there was a huge uptick in.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not talking partisan, we're
Politics.
talking words, right?
Right.
It's words out of
Facts.
someone's mouth, and that has a adverse reaction, sadly.
Yeah. And ADL, by the way, has been working closely with the Asian community. They don't have necessarily an entity like an ADL to fight hate. They haven't had to encounter this in the same way before, and we've been working closely with them. There's something that's been created called the Asian American Foundation. And the Asian American Foundation, its only non-Asian founding board member is Jonathan Greenblatt, our CEO, because we were really out there at the forefront of working with the Asian community.
Yeah. You're talking about the work you're doing with the anti-Asian community, the anti-Asian hate stuff, but you also do other social justice causes like the Black Lives Matter, and that the organization does all of that, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. ADL believes deeply that Black lives do matter and that there's systemic racism in this country, and that we all need to play our part to help end systemic racism in this country. For us, immigrant issues are very important. Many of us in the Jewish community are only a generation or two away from being immigrants ourselves, and we believe deeply in immigration reform. Voting rights, very important part of ADL's agenda, which especially over the course of this past year became even more important.
I mean, it's incredible. It's a lot, it's a lot what sort of the world around us is dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is. I know this Sunday, October 10th, you have a walk against hate. I just put up the link for anybody. You want to tell us about that?
Absolutely. So the walk against hate was something that was started in person in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, and it grew and grew and grew. And in this virtual world, we now have these sort of virtual walks where people commit to walk and raise money for the organization, but they're using their feet to fight hate. They get a T-shirt that says "Walk Against Hate," and people are making that kind of declaration, moving in some way to fight hate. We also have our Never Is Now conference coming up, November 7th to 9th. So Never Is Now is ADL's major conference where we're putting forth thought leaders on the issues of fighting hate and how to fight hate. Thought leaders on what the issue is and how to fight hate. That's November 7th to 9th.
Is that virtually as well?
Yeah, so that had been a conference in New York City. People would come, they would pay to attend, and that's not the case anymore with COVID. That is now a completely virtual conference and completely free. So you can, it's available to all your listeners. We also, in December, we have something called In Concert Against Hate. Again, that had been a local kind of effort in Washington, D.C. Every year at the Kennedy Center, there was a concert for 20 years, which was devoted to fighting hate, and we would lift up all different individuals who somehow fought hate over the course of the year and have their story come out. But in the wake of COVID, that became a virtual event last year. It's going to be a virtual event again this year. Really very, very special because you're seeing artists all coming together, and they're all coming together for this common purpose. And you're seeing all these incredibly brave individuals who have fought hate over the course of the year. So 3 months and 3 incredible events: the Walk Against Hate in October, the Never Is Now in November, and In Concert Against Hate in December. All of it available on our website, adl.org, and you can find information and sign up, and all totally free.
I mean, it really is incredible the work you guys do, and sort of sad isn't the right word, but it's sort of never ending because we are seeing such spikes in this, and that's, you would hope that an organization, that it would reverse, but I think, we talked about it. Social media is a huge part of that, and the conspiracy theories, all around us right now.
I would add polarization. We're living in a time of incredible polarization. And I think I sort of stopped with the third way. I said legislation, education, and civil society. Civil society, I didn't really elaborate on. And just to say very quickly, have a time of polarization, it's hard for civil society to grab hold of hate, because what happens is, instead of people pushing hate to the margins, they take sides. They take sides, and they if you're on one side, then you forgive things that happen on your side, and you castigate whatever happens on the other side, and vice versa. That's very skewed. That doesn't allow you to say what's really unacceptable and push it to the margins. It creates that kind of vacuum, and it also allows the edges to start coming towards the center. And that's what we're experiencing with polarization. So we all have a role to play in being a less polarized society and begin to push that hate to the margins.
I can't think of a better way to end that, but I want you to take a minute to tell people about your podcast, From the Front Lines.
Absolutely. Thank you for that opportunity.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it, and it's great because it is these short, powerful, informative, when we're talking about such an important topic that you're covering in your podcast. But you take it away.
Yeah. So I started this podcast only a few months ago, and when I started it, I said, you know what? People want these kind of quick snippets. And I decided to do only 10-minute podcasts on one issue, one guest, and put it out there. These are all ways to fight hate. They're all very practical things that people can do. And I interview somebody from the ADL staff. ADL is working in so many different directions that it's given me a lot of great material. This past week, for example, I honored National Hispanic Heritage Month by interviewing our Director of Latin American Affairs. And this is a person who's working to combat hate and anti-Semitism in the countries of Central and South America. So she spoke about what the situation is like. And also, we have a lot of resources for the Spanish-speaking community in this country. So she sort of lifted all that up. That was great. Many interesting episodes. People can find From the Front Lines on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on SoundCloud. Just search for From the Front Lines, but make sure Front Lines, as you have it written, is one word, not two. And Front Lines, it's plural. I think there is somebody who's done something similar with a different way of constructing.
Yeah, if people spell the Locher Room wrong in search, they could be in trouble.
Right.
Yeah, so I understand that. You said there were 25 offices for ADL, right?
Yep.
How many people in the organization doing this amazing work?
We have several hundred staff around the country, as well as a couple of offices globally. We have an office in Berlin and an office in Israel, also, and some other staff people. And their job is to fight anti-Semitism and hate in Europe, and actually to work with Israeli society. In Israel, their job is to what they call do social cohesion, bring the different pieces of Israeli society together. And obviously, in the wake of the conflict, that had become very, very important to work with the Arab community, the Druze community, all different communities to make Israel a more cohesive society. So this is really work that we're doing around the world, fighting hate and trying to bring people closer together.
Incredible work, and thank you to each and every one of the ADL team. And Scott, thank you so much for spending the time today. I mean, I could go on for 2 hours because it's fascinating to me. I am going to look at the site. I definitely want to get more involved, but really thank you for taking the time and talking to me and sharing this with everybody.
Thanks so much, Alan. Thanks for having me on the show. Thanks to all your listeners for listening to all of this. And I hope people will explore all the different resources and get involved to the extent they can. We all need to play our part. And you can, of course, find me. My handle on Twitter is at Scott A. Richman, middle initial A. And there's, of course, there's an ADL site, an ADL New York, New Jersey handle. And also on Facebook.
Great. And your Twitter, I'm not sure if the Twitter is up, but I'll put it up on the YouTube link, and the ADL for New York, New Jersey is up on the YouTube link for this. So people can find it there as well. And information, if anybody wants to do the walk this Sunday as well, they can find the link there as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Scott, you stay well. And thank
you
you so much. Have a great evening, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks so much. You too.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Scott Richman, for joining us today. As I leave you, remember, we all have choices to make in life. Speak up, do the right thing, and let's all fight hate for good. I truly believe conversations like this can change the world around us. Please feel free to share these episodes with your friends and family. And until the next conversation, have a great evening, everybody.